Howdy readers, I'm Jason, and this is Chapter and Verse. And this is my Booktube Prize judging video that I have been planning to make for about a week now. So I was a judge for the quarterfinals of this year's inaugural Booktube Prize judging. I judged Group C. I read 6 books in about 6 weeks, 7 weeks. But the experience was less than I hoped it would be, let's say. So what I wanted to share with you were my rankings of these 6 books. So my number 6 book was Freshwater by Akwaeke, Emezi, and I don't have a hard copy of it here. I checked it out from the library, interlibrary loan, so here it is on my old iPad. So I ranked it number 6 out of 6, which would imply that I thought it was the worst book of the bunch, which isn't actually true. I ranked Freshwater number 6 because maybe I shouldn't have done this, right? Maybe I shouldn't have gone and read interviews with the writers and blah, blah, blah. But that's just what I do whenever I read a book. But I ranked it at number 6, largely because even though the book is marketed as a novel, Akwaeke Emezi has made very clear in interviews, including in a piece, I think, in the New York Times, that that this is autobiography. This is not autobiographical fiction in the same way that, say, The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath is autobiographical fiction. One gets the sense in reading interviews with Akwaeke Emezi that this is her, okay? Right on down to the entire forearm black tattoo sleeve that she has, right, to hide the scars from cutting herself. Everything in this book, one gets the sense that everything in this book is autobiography. Okay, so here's a character in the book, a main character in the book, who comes to believe that she is inhabited by gods, right? That she actually has gods living inside her. And Emezi has said in interviews that this is true of her, that she, it's not a multiple personality thing or anything like that, but that she has gods inside her, that she is a god, that she has spirits that live within her. Not her soul, but actual sort of spirits that are other than her, that live inside of her and wrestle and struggle and this, that, and the other thing. She has said in interviews that this is really this is autobiography. So, since this is a competition for novels, I didn't think it would be right to rank this anything higher than 6th place. That said, there is still a lot wrong with this book, and the biggest thing wrong with this book is the fact that so after you read 300 pages. You don't really know anything about the main character. You don't know anything about her, who she is, what she's done, etc., etc., what's important to her, what her passions are, apart from the fact that she has a lot of sex, she's been raped, and she has spirits living inside her skull. That's it. That's it, right? The characterization in this book falls so short that you find yourself wondering what all the fuss was about and why so many people are tripping over themselves to praise this book, because there's really not very much to it. There's no plot, there's very little kind of psychological depth, and the characterization is it's thin at best and ridiculous at worst. So, but that said, it was not the worst book, even though I rated it 6th, because, again, the writer herself considers it autobiography. the worst book of the bunch, for my money, was An American Marriage by Tayari Jones. The fact that this book has won the Women's Prize for Fiction, more than anything, has led to me losing faith, I think, in literary prizes more than any other literary prize result that I can remember. And I know a lot of people have kind of lost faith in literary prizes as a whole because of this happening or that happening. But An American Marriage is a pretty terrible book. And it doesn't matter, right? Oprah Winfrey loved it. It's been optioned for a film. Just won the Women's Prize. She won £30,000 for it. So what's wrong with An American Marriage? So before I move into that, let me just say there will be spoilers in this video about this book. So if you haven't read it yet and you really don't want to know what happens, just, fast forward. I will put in the description box below the timestamp for when I'm done talking about this book, if you want to just skip forward to that. But in An American Marriage, we have three main characters. So there's Roy, right, who is the main character, his wife Celestial, and his best friend Andre, who kind of becomes Celestial's other man, we'll say. She embarks on an affair with Andre while Roy is in prison for something he did not do. Okay, so why is that an issue? Well, it wouldn't be an issue in the hands of a really great writer. Okay, but if you're going to tell a story in the voices from the perspectives of three different characters, those three voices and perspectives need to feel distinct from each other, and these don't, right? So we get their names at the beginning of their sections, right? So we know who's talking, whose mind we're in, but they all pretty much feel like the same character. And if you're a novelist who has decided to do that, you should be able to realize when that's something that is outside your ken, right? That's beyond your scope. And so then what you need to do is sort of reframe the novel in your head and not tell it in first person in three different voices. If those voices sound virtually identical to each other, which these do. That's problem number one. Problem number two is that, so when Roy goes to prison for something he did not do, after a while in prison, he is assigned a new cellmate. So let me just say, before we get into that essentially Roy is adopted, right? So his mother had him and then got together with and married the man who essentially became his adoptive father, who he's named after, right? So his father, his adoptive father in the book, is known as Big Roy, and he's Roy Jr. He never knew his biological father. His biological father was infamous for going from state to state to state to state all over the South. Sleeping around and committing crimes and this, that, and the other thing. So anyway, to get back to the story, Roy goes to prison for something he didn't do. And after some time in prison, he is assigned a new cellmate whose name is Walter. Well, it turns out that Walter is Roy's biological father, okay? And when Roy tells his wife Celestial this in a letter, he actually writes in the letter, he's like, basically, hold on to your seat. You're not going to believe this, but my cellmate is my biological dad. And I wanted to throw the book across the room. He tells her, you're not going to believe this because it's fucking unbelievable. It's a stupid plot twist. It would have been a stupid plot twist if his father, his biological father, Walter, who is in the prison cell with him, had been in that vicinity, had been in that area, stayed in that area his whole life. But he didn't, right? He went from state to state to state, like I've said. So the fact that in the book he ends up in the same prison as his biological son and gets himself assigned to his biological son's cell because he sees that his biological son's middle name is Othaniel, which is Walter's actual name. And so he assumes, oh, that must be my son. It literally made me roll my eyes. When I encounter plot twists like that, that are just insanely, unbelievably improbable, the book just gets taken down a couple notches in my esteem. But that's not the only thing wrong with this book. So the last 50 pages of the novel are so badly done. They read like such a melodramatic soap opera that I couldn't wait to get to the end of it. One of the most beautiful things, maybe the only beautiful thing actually in an American marriage, is when Roy's mother, whose name is Olive, dies while he's in prison. So Roy's wife and Andre, who she will sleep with for the first time that night, of course that night, go to the funeral. And Roy's adoptive father, Big Roy, he won't let anybody else other than himself bury his wife, Olive. And he buries her with a shovel. And it's incredibly moving, and it speaks volumes about how important marriage is to him. And yet, when Roy gets out of prison, he goes to his adoptive father's house, and he stays with him for a little while before he goes to try to sort of get his wife back. And, and his father's all about Roy getting his wife back. And yet Roy runs into an old acquaintance of his. I think she's working at Walmart or something like this. And they shack up for a few nights and, have a lot of sex, and she teaches him how to feel like a man again, et cetera, et cetera. And his adoptive father, Big Roy, who insisted on burying his own wife with his own two hands and a shovel, for whom marriage is this sacred thing, all right, a sacrament. His adoptive father's fine with it. He's just like, oh yeah, you've been out sowing your oats, right? Planting seeds. And it was just totally unbelievable. I did not for a moment believe that Roy's father, adoptive father, would have responded to Roy's behavior in that way. I thought it was ridiculous. It made no sense. It was completely out of character for Big Roy. And so there's that, right? But in the end, right, so it all boils down to those last 50 pages in which that sleeping around with the woman who works at Walmart happens. That last 50 pages, right, with the tree in the front yard and the fighting and her wanting to take Roy back, and Celestial wanting to take Roy back and giving Andre the boot, and the confusion around there, and the fact that her dolls that she makes these like baby dolls, high end, right, these beautiful kind of sculptured dolls, and the fact that they're called poupées is just the dumbest thing in the world, because that word, I realize it's a French word, but it makes me think of shitty diapers. That's the only thing poupée can make a person in America think of. And so the fact that she's making these high-end baby dolls and naming them a word which makes people think of their soiled bottoms. So yeah, don't get me started. At the end of the book, I read the acknowledgments page, and I took a photo of the first paragraph in the acknowledgments page. And this is what Tayari Jones wrote. There were many moments in the composition of this work when I feared I would not be able to resolve the thorny conflicts that both bind and separate these characters. Okay, let me just say, it's not up to you to decide that you resolve them. It's up to the reader, and you didn't. The ending of this book is colossally stupid. It made this the worst novel of these 6 novels for me. And yet, I suppose there are enough people who disagree with me to move it through to the semifinals and to award it the Women's Prize for Fiction and £30,000. But yeah, you didn't wrap it up in any kind of convincing way, Tayari Jones. I'm sorry. It's a terrible book. Number 4, the book I ranked 4th, which was actually the book I was kind of expecting to place 3rd going into this. Because it's a book about spies, and it's a book about radio, I work in radio. I love novels about spies, and it's set during and after World War II, which again is a time period that I love. And it's set in London, which is my favorite city in the world. And so that is Transcription by Kate Atkinson. And so again, I should have loved this book far more than I did. It was inspired by Human Voices by Penelope Fitzgerald, which I didn't know for certain until I finished the book and read the acknowledgments and the author's notes at the end. But while I was reading it, I was like, "God, this feels a whole lot like Human Voices," and sure enough, that book was the inspiration for Transcription. But the spy elements in Transcription were really pretty shoddily done, and the ending was completely rushed. Like, I mean, it was just completely rushed. It felt a little bit like she got sick of her book and she just wanted it to be over. So because I felt that way about that novel, it ranked 4th instead of 3rd. 3rd place went to Washington Black, which did move through to the semifinals, but I wasn't terribly pleased about that because I still felt pretty lukewarm about Washington Black. There was a lot of promise in this novel. There was some really wonderful prose in this novel. There was one paragraph in Washington Black that I saved in my commonplace book. But I had 2 really big problems with Washington Black. And the first one is that most covers of the book that I had seen featured this craft. Okay, what is that craft, right? One is left thinking that this is a kind of mix of historical fiction and magical realism, especially when one reads all of the synopses of the book online. It's a novel about a journey about a young boy who escapes slavery in the Caribbean and makes his way on an extraordinary journey, right, through the Americas up to the Arctic, over to London. And with a cover like this, one is left thinking that this is the vessel that serves as his transport. So I was really excited for it, for that reason alone. And so the vessel there on the cover is called the Cloud Cutter. And we see it being constructed, we see it being built in the novel. And then the Cloud Cutter disappears. It is properly in the novel for about 2.5 pages. And then it's gone. It sinks below the ocean waves and doesn't come back. And so I was really, really irritated that the marketing for this novel, the synopsis combined with all of the cover art from around the world, virtually all of the covers feature this craft, promised it as being one thing, and it was not that thing. So that was a problem, but it wasn't a problem I couldn't get past. But the end of the novel as well felt like it just fell off a cliff. Not to the extent that Kate Atkinson's ending did. It didn't feel like she didn't kind of know where to go with it or what to do with it. But it was just really unresolved, and it left you wondering what the hell the book was really about in the first place. So I felt like Washington Black could have used another pass, another revision, but still, it was a good book. And then we move on to my number 2 book, which was Warlight by Michael Ondaatje. All right, so Warlight has in it, let me just start out by saying that Warlight did not take my number 1 spot, mostly because its second half is weaker than its first half. And the novel that did take my number 1 spot is really a pretty perfect book. But Warlight has in it, let me make sure I get the page correct here in my British edition. It's got a 4-page chunk of prose that is better. It's better written than anything in any of the other books among the 6 that I read for the Booktube Prize Quarterfinals, Group C. I was going to read you all 4 pages of this, in this video, but this video is already getting quite long. So I think what I'll do is I will read all 4 pages of this in another video here in a couple of days. And if you want to hear those 4 pages of prose, which are better than anything in An American Marriage or Freshwater or Transcription or Washington Black or even, frankly, Fire Sermon, which is my #1 book from these 6, you can look for that video here soon. But Warlight was amazing, and the fact that it didn't move through to the semifinals, I find both shocking and a little scandalous, and I'm sorry to say, a little telling, I suppose, of the taste of the people reading these books and judging these books. But then, right, it all boils down to taste, right? That's the thing. That's one of the lessons I learned with this, is that there's no accounting for taste. We all approach fiction differently. We all look for different things in it. We expect different things from it. Some of us are language people. Some of us are character people. Some of us are plot people. And I'm very much so a language and ideas person. And Warlight and Fire Sermon were the 2 novels in this group that certainly privileged those 2 things above character, above plot. And they didn't make it through to the semifinals. My top 2 books did not make it through to the semifinals, and both of my bottom 2 books did, which left me pretty disappointed, I suppose, in the 7 weeks I spent reading this material. I'm not naive enough to think that both of my top 2 books would have made it or necessarily should have made it, but the fact that neither of them did, and both of the books that I thought were clearly the weakest in this group did make it through to the semifinals, was disappointing in the extreme. So this is Fire Sermon by Jamie Quatro. This was my #1 book in this group. And this is a novel by a writer who is a Christian about a main character who is a Christian, who has been married for a very long time, has 2 kids with her husband, and who embarks on an affair with a poet. I have never committed adultery on my wife. I would never do that. But at the same time, I love it when writers are brave enough and visionary enough to take subject matter that makes us uncomfortable, okay, and do something with it that feels revolutionary and that feels new. I would think that one of the hardest things to do as a novelist or as a filmmaker would be to write a character who is in the midst of adultery and somehow leave us feeling sympathy for that character. It's one of the reasons why I love the Jane Austen Book Club, not the novel so much as the film. I love the film. It's my ultimate comfort movie. And the Jimmy Smits character in that movie, in that story, has committed adultery and has left his wife, etc., etc. But by the end of the film, you feel for him. You abstain from judging him. And I think that that's kind of extraordinary to do. And Jamie Quatro gives us such a complicated portrait of a woman who decides to commit adultery. And she gives us such complicated and profound and unsettling explorations of theology and marriage that I was really kind of blown away by Fire Sermon. It's also a novel, and I did not know that going into this, it's also a novel that speaks deeply and personally to me with its references. So I'm reading the book, and I came across this. When all of this is over, and Thomas is finally asleep beside her, and she's filled with the gray numbness, only then does she think to pray. A poem she remembers approximately. Dear God, who are my rock, my steady Christ, hear me. I lie here lost, hidden, pushed away from the core. Endanger me, if not in my body, then by words hammered into my brain, or death as fire, as slow flaying as bloody lilies. but not this nothing. And as soon as I read that, I knew I had read and was familiar with the poem that she was kind of approximately quoting there. She does not mention the poem here, the title of it, or the poet, although the poet is named later in the book. So I went down to the library in our basement and I started flipping through my collections of Linda Gregg's poetry. And I found this after just a couple of minutes. This is Ravenous by her. Dear God, who are my mountain, my kissing birds, my steady Christ, hear me. Thou who are soft Aphrodite, lifting the cotton sheet, to show old Hephaestus that she has given her body to Ares that very hour, in the same light. O leisurely, hair in an envelope, leaf that is all spine and bones with fragments of flesh from time of being, blue heron in the dark breaking open the woods, help me. I lie here lost, hidden, pushed away from the core of things. Endanger me, if necessary. If not in my body, then by words hammered into my brain, or death as fire, as slow flaying, as bloody lilies. But please, not this nothing. So, a novel that does what this novel does with theology and with poetry, standing on the shoulders of these two literary and philosophical art forms, and seeing so far that it leaves one trembling at times. That's the novel. That's the best novel of the bunch. The fact that it didn't make the semifinals makes me sad. It made me angry initially. I couldn't stop talking about it for a day. But now it just makes me feel sad. And it makes me wonder if I'll ever participate in the judging again. Because on some level, I feel like my time was wasted. Because I didn't want to just judge, but I wanted my own thoughts and my own tastes to somehow be represented moving forward. And the fact that they weren't was difficult to take, I suppose. It was a little difficult to swallow. I should say that Fire Sermon was first put on my radar by Jennifer at Insert Literary Pun Here. She doesn't really do reviews anymore, although she does talk about this book when she read it more than a year ago in a wrap-up video that is still available. But I have for a long time thought that she is the savviest literary critic on Booktube. And she gave this 5 stars. And it was one of the first wow reads, in her words, of 2018. And yeah, I would concur with that. This absolutely deserved to move through. And it sucks, frankly, that it didn't. This should have been the book that won the Women's Prize for Fiction, not An American Marriage. So those are my thoughts on the Booktube Prize judging. This may end up being my longest video yet. I hope you stick with me. I will try to put timestamps in the description box below. And I will see you guys again very soon with those 4 pages from Warlight that I wanted to read in this video, but decided to leave for another video. So, adios.